Our third respondent is Braden Molhoek, and Braden is writing his dissertation here at the GTU in Ethics and Social Theory. He's been long interested in virtue ethics, and his dissertation is going to deal with Reinhold Niebuhr and Niebuhr's anthropology in conversation with the natural sciences. So, Braden, the floor is yours.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, I'll be focusing a lot on what Dr. Herzfeld had to say about Niebuhr. Go figure. I want to thank you for your paper and to the Center for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. My response will be divided unequally into three sections: one on love, one on anthropology, and one on sin, each receiving more attention than the previous. Many of my comments also draw upon the work of Reinhold Niebuhr, and although you only reference him explicitly toward the end of your paper, I see elements of his work throughout it. I appreciate the emphasis that you gave on incarnation in terms of resurrection and eternal life. However, I think that incarnation is also relevant for your section on love. The incarnation is not just about embracing a mortal embodied existence and an embodied eternal life. It is also about love. Even if humans had not sinned, the incarnation still would have occurred. God understands the importance of physicality, and God's desire to be in relationship with creation led to God take on flesh. You asked the question of whether love requires a body. And while I agree with your analysis of emotion and the necessity of physicality for response, I ultimately think that I answer your question by saying it depends on who the lover is. I believe that human beings as lovers, as we currently understand humans and love, require bodies. But God does not need a body to love creation. The incarnation is an expression of God's love for humans and the rest of creation, but it wasn't a prerequisite for God's love. So, to use Niebuhr's language, you could say that the incarnation was inevitable, but not necessary. That being said, I do wonder whether your point about how the lover needing a body raises a profound theological question. Did the incarnation affect the way that God experiences love? I don't have an answer, but I think it's a really interesting question brought up by your paper, and I'd be curious whether you have any additional thoughts about it. The anthropology section. In your defense against a new dualism, you state that, quote, "We are neither just a mind nor a body, but a mind that is both part and product of our human body, which exists embedded within a larger physical and cultural environment. A prolongation of our existence that does not provide a human-like body would not be a human existence, but something quite different," end quote. I agree with you, and I think that transhumanism gives theologians an opportunity to think deeper about how science helps shape even our theological understandings of human nature. You reference him toward the end of your paper, but Reinhold Niebuhr's anthropology makes the same claim that you do regarding changes to human nature. There are two aspects to his anthropology, the creaturely and the transcendent. But there's a permeability between the two. In other words, these two aspects are not completely isolated from one another. They affect each other and cannot be reduced to a dualism of matter and spirit. Through enhancements, genetic or otherwise cybernetic, the creaturely aspect of human nature could change profoundly. I would argue that changes in human nature are not new, since humans are the product of evolution and continue to be influenced by selection, both natural and artificial. However, technologies such as mind uploading would be change on a scale not seen since the evolution of modern humans. Individuals who uploaded their minds would experience reality in a fundamentally different way. I would argue that such a change would result in the creation of a new species, which has implications for anthropology and ethics. Niebuhr speaks of the perfection of human nature, and while he does not believe it is possible in this life, he does describe what human perfection would entail. The perfection of the transcendent aspect of human nature is in the theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. The perfection of the creaturely aspect of human nature is the fulfillment of the natural law. The natural law for humans, according to Niebuhr, is a harmony of relationships that God desires for creation. There are three forms of harmony. Harmony between God and self, between self and the rest of creation, and the harmony within the self, the ordered soul. Changing the creaturely aspect of human nature to the point of creating one or more new species means changing our understanding of what constitutes harmony in these relationships. Creating artificial intelligence would alter the harmony between humans and the rest of creation, having us relate closely to AI and ultimately be responsible for the ways in which AI changes creation. In terms of how transhumanism would affect the harmony, some would question whether there could be harmony at all between self and God if a person uses mind uploading to try and live forever. Such a decision seems to fit Niebuhr's understanding of sin perfectly. Anxiety about one's finitude and the contingencies of life leads one to alleviate their anxiety on their own and not looking toward God. But there are technologies that could potentially contribute to human flourishing. And while Niebuhr believed the social gospel movement was too optimistic in what is possible, his realist position can still support certain uses of biotechnology. This is a very modest claim, though, because of the potential for sin. The third section, sin, starting with pride. Niebuhr identifies four kinds of pride, but admits these categories are ideal types and are never really separable. The first kind of pride is pride of power. The pride of power refers to both the desire for power, if that desire is motivated by the goal of ego or pride, as well as pride found in exercising and achieving power. Niebuhr argues, quote, "There is a pride of power in which the human ego assumes its self-sufficiency and self-mastery and imagines itself secure against all vicissitudes. It does not recognize the contingent and dependent character of life and believes itself to be the author of its own existence, the judge of its own values, and the master of its own destiny. Humans believe they are capable of understanding and mastering their genome, and thus their future." In his book, Playing God, Ted Peters identifies two forms of determinism generally found in the term of genetic determinism: puppet determinism and Promethean determinism. Promethean determinism is the future aspect of determinism, and it is related to the pride of power. It is the assumption that humans will be able to fully understand what it means to be human biologically, and then have complete power over human evolution. Like Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods to give to humans, biotechnology in such a framework is seen as a tool that humans now possess, but perhaps should or should not use. This is an extension of the accusation of playing God, that only God should have the ability to change humanity. The second form of pride is pride of knowledge, and often it is accompanied by pride of power, but is focused more on the intellect, mind, and reason. It involves an attempt to obscure the finitude of humans, especially what humans are capable of knowing. In the context of biotechnology, intellectual pride allows people to forget that humans have been alive for such a short period of time and have had knowledge of evolution and genetics for only a fraction of that time. Humans are finite and do not know everything. Peter's notion of puppet determinism is relevant here. In order to minimize the finitude of human understanding, humanness is reduced to the genetic or the neurological level. The third kind of pride is moral pride. People view themselves as righteous and others not, because they do not match the standards that they have and believe that they themselves meet. There is a history of eugenics, of trying to control human evolution by controlling who is allowed to reproduce. Biotechnology allows the continuation and furthering of this. If gene therapy can alter traits, people who are deemed to have undesirable or deleterious traits could be killed as before, or they could be altered to conform to what others consider normal or advantageous. Even positive reasons for pursuing biotechnology, such as the curing of diseases, can be twisted by moral pride. It is essential to remember that an evolutionary view of creation serves as a reminder that God values diversity and that uniformity would disrupt the harmony that God intends. The final kind of pride, spiritual pride, is an extension of moral pride. Spiritual pride arises when humans attempt to link their own standards to God's standards. In the context of biotechnology, it would be any decision that explicitly states a therapy or enhancement is closer to human perfection. There is a fine line between wanting to alleviate suffering, curing disease, and trying to make humans more compassionate on one hand, and eugenics on the other. Spiritual pride, I would argue, is the most important thing for religious supporters of biotechnology to be cognizant of when determining what kinds of therapies or enhancements to support. I've spent more time than I probably should have on Niebuhr's understanding of sin as pride, but he also speaks of sin as sensuality, and I think there's at least as much sensuality at work in transhumanism as there is pride. Pride is most often, quote, sin as inordinate self-assertion, unquote, and often attributed primarily to people who hold power, but it is not the only way that humans deal with anxiety. Niebuhr also identifies sensuality as another form of sin. Sensuality can refer to matters of sexual ethics, and while Niebuhr would classify many sexual sins as a part of sensuality, he's actually arguing a different point. Sensuality is about avoiding the anxiety that comes from the contingent aspects of life, and focusing more often than not on pleasures, quote, such as possessions, food, drink, or TV, and also by withdrawing from activities in a threatening world. We attempt to insulate ourselves and perhaps grow numb. Now the problem is not inordinate self-assertion, but rather deficient participation in our many relationships and responsibilities. End quote. It is tempting to say that since pride is often used by people who have power, sensuality must be the way that people without power engage their anxiety. But this is an incorrect conclusion. People who also have power employ sensuality due to fear and anxiety. Sometimes it is because people are not sure they can live up to expectations. In other words, it is not people who lack ability, but confidence, who also commit the sin of sloth and laziness, where we take refuge in immediate distractions and sensual pleasures to avoid reaching for higher goals or ideals. People may be unsure about whether or not they are pursuing the best course of action. Arguing against American isolationism in World War II, Niebuhr believed that to not take part in the struggle against Hitler was, quote, an attempt to avoid the risks and anxieties of action by renouncing the responsibilities of power, end quote. This position is clearly a part of Niebuhr's realism. Being unsure, afraid, anxious, or any other number of hesitations are not sufficient reasons for failing to act, and it does nothing to lessen culpability. While it may be easy to identify sin as pride in the pursuit of biotechnology, I would argue that sin as sensuality is just as present and even precedes pride. Niebuhr makes the distinction between pride and sensuality, and even though he ultimately believes sensuality is related to the love of self that is typified in sin as pride, sensuality is also about the disruption of the harmony within the person, a disordered soul. The person focuses too much on the pleasures of the creaturely life and not on God. Part of what is sensuality is the reification of the self. Indulging every pleasure to its fullest is a sign of power and an expression of idolatry, something that one is free to do because they have the resources and ability to do so. Transhumanists certainly fall into such thinking. There is rhetoric of the right to eternal life, and inhibiting the pursuit of this right, some believe, should be criminalized. And while any extension of life that can be achieved now is welcome, the ultimate goal is to allow people to achieve immortality when they are at their physical peak. Extreme caloric restriction is currently the only known method for drastically increasing one's lifespan, but I am unaware of any transhumanists who are doing this. Immortality, it seems, is less meaningful without total freedom to engage in any activity that is a pleasure. Sensuality appears to be a core aspect of the transhumanist vision of immortality. The other part of sensuality is escaping the self. The self is anxious and knows it should not be the center of existence, and looks to alleviate this anxiety through immersion in that which is not ultimate. The quest for immortality can be understood as an expression of anxiety. If God is not the center of one's existence, and one does not have faith and hope in God's promise for the future, then the future is full of anxiety. In order to combat this anxiety, transhumanism looks to a post-human existence where there can be confidence in the future because it is controlled by oneself. The goal of immortality, or post-human existence, becomes the center of one's life. The reason that I brought sensuality into the discussion is because I think it offers additional insights into the nature of sin and biotechnology. The question I have for you is whether you think that sensuality is also operative in the quest for artificial intelligence. Are humans looking to create intelligent computers to allow humans to withdraw from their responsibilities in the world and to focus on the pleasures of life? Thank you.